what we need to do is figure out how we can end up with around 250 points for each player, and hopefully our defense ends up with about 20, 10 to 20. I mean, even with 250, you're pretty safe, but I'd feel much better with an extra 10 or 20 points. But defense aside, you have 8 positions, and like we said, 260 divided by 8 is 32 and a half. So we want to get an average of 32 and a half points out of those 8 position players. So the easiest way that I find to do this, you can whip out the calculator and run the math the right way, or a quick shortcut is to look at a player's salary and multiply it by 5 and ask yourself if that player can score that many points. So, for instance, someone like Julio Jones is 9,000. So you multiply 9 by 5, and you end up with 45. Can Julio Jones get 45 points in a game? Maybe. But then you look at someone that's $3,000, multiply that by 5, you still only need to get 15 out of him to, still average your 260. So, Julio Jones might not make 45, but someone like David Johnson this week, who's at 3,400, might end up with 17 points. I mean, Chris Johnson's out. They're going to be pretty far ahead of St. Louis probably. So, I mean, you can definitely imagine David Johnson ending up with 17 or more. So, in that case, if you're going to put both of them in the lineup, you can feel safe playing Julio Jones. And that is not a specific example. I mean, you can use those two. I like them both. But basically, you need to just ask yourself when you're picking your players, can this guy score, 5 times his salary? And that's why I tend to stay away from some of the really top tier players, because even though they can go off for 35 or 40 points, it's pretty rare. You look at DeAndre Hopkins, he can go off for 35 points, but also he can put up 8 points, just like he did for me last week. So a lot of the lineups, or a lot of the players, rather, that we're going to look at for this week are really low owned and relatively cheap because, like I said, I like to build lineups made entirely of people that I'm confident, can put up 5 times their salary. So, at around the $6,000 level or lower, I mean, virtually anybody can put up 30 DraftKings points on a good day. So 6,000 and lower, you're pretty safe. You just have to have 8 players that all, put up 30 or more points. So, I mean, there's 240, and then you got a good defense. Boom, you got 260. Okay, so on to the picks for this week. As you can see on the slides, a lot of the people that I put on for each position are players that are pretty low owned on the FanDuel Thursday ownership percentages. And now these aren't going to be exact, but they're pretty good indicators of what the ownership percentages are going to look like on DraftKings. Like always, be careful when you're picking your lineups. I mean, make sure, check Roto World, check whoever you got to check, and make sure that the injury reports are out and you know what you're getting into, because you start a player that's injured or not playing, that's it. Your lineup is basically kaput in one of these big GPPs. So anyway, on to the quarterbacks. In no particular order. I know I have them numbered, but this isn't a list from first to worst of players that I like. These are just 4 players at each position that I think are going to have a good week. Ben Roethlisberger, right? Everybody knows what he can put up, huge numbers. The last game that they played against the Seahawks turned out to be a shootout. I think this game's going to be one too. Indianapolis running game isn't really that great. Frank Gore's beat to hell. Matt Hasselbeck's been playing really well, who we'll talk about next. But those 2 guys, I think you can be pretty safe playing Ben and 1 or 2 of his receivers on one lineup, and Hasselbeck and a couple of his, and then mix and match. I mean, I have some lineups with Ben, Antonio Brown, and Martavis Bryant, and then also T.Y. Hilton. And I'll have some other ones with Hasselbeck, Hilton, and Moncrief, but also I'll put, Marcus Wheaton or Antonio Brown or Martavis Bryant in there, because in a shootout, all passing type of game like that, I mean, obviously one team is scoring a lot of passing touchdowns, the other team's got to catch up. I mean, if the Colts are down by 17 at halftime, you think they're going to run the ball coming out? I don't think so. So, Hasselbeck's been really good filling in for Andrew Luck this year. He's old, but, he's showing some signs of life. Ryan Fitzpatrick has been just great, this year. He's averaging 17.98 DraftKings points. His average projected points, he's exceeding by over 5 points on average. So, I mean, at a $5,200 salary, that's basically almost as low as you can get. So I'd feel comfortable putting him in, especially with Brandon Marshall after the game he had last week. It's kind of hard for me to say how that game's going to go. I don't know. It depends on how New York does, or New York Giants, that is. If the Giants, end up having some success through the air, I think the Jets are going to have to match that pace. Otherwise, if the Giants, implode like they've been known to do, look out for Chris Ivory on the running back front. That's why we play these cheap GPPs. They have huge payouts, and the small buy-in allows us to create as many lineups as we see fit. I have a whole system for picking combinations of players and making sure that I don't have the same groups of players in different lineups. I want to have every possibility covered, because the worst feeling in the world is having 4 or 5 players all go off, yet in every lineup that group of players is in, you have somebody with them that scores like 4 points and ruins every one of those lineups. So I try to diversify while also covering and as much as I can, and having the players that I think are really going to do well in the most possible lineups. The last quarterback I think that I really like for this week is Ryan Tannehill. He doesn't get much love, but if you look at his numbers, I mean, he's averaging more DraftKings points per game than Fitzpatrick and Hasselbeck. He's thrown 20 touchdowns on the year. Jarvis Landry had a huge game last week. He's only 2.1% owned, and he's $5,300. I mean, with a $5,300 quarterback, you really can't go wrong, because you can stock up on some high-priced receivers, especially like with Roethlisberger, he's $6,600. So I tend to put him with Martavis Bryant more, but someone like Tannehill's $5,300, you can play him with Jarvis Landry, or you can play Hasselbeck with T.Y. Hilton. You could stock up on other positions when you go cheap at a quarterback, and quarterback is one of those positions that doesn't seem to, most quarterbacks don't seem to have a very low day. I mean, it happens. Look at Phillip Rivers whenever he goes up against a really solid defense. I mean, he can put up 6 points or he can put up 35. I mean, but for the most part, I'd say 90% of all quarterbacks are going to score you at least 15 to 20 DraftKings points every week. So that's not the most important position as far as I'm concerned. That would be wide receiver, but we'll get to that in a minute. All right, so a couple of my favorite running backs for this week. One, like I said, Chris Ivory. He's only 7.8% owned, and I mean, he's got 8 touchdowns on the year. I mean, you can't argue with that. So it just depends on how you feel about that game. I mean, if you're a big believer in the Giants offense, then maybe sit Ivory this week. But if you think that the Giants are going to implode, kind of like I do, I'm rolling with Ivory in a lot of my lineups. Another guy I really like is Giovanni Bernard. I recommended him last week. He did all right. It wasn't, a phenomenal day, but I mean, solid. For 4,500, if you do the math, I mean, he needs, 22 and a half DraftKings points. I mean, that's not unreasonable, especially for a Cincinnati team that's probably going to blow Cleveland out of the water. They're going to be up big at halftime, and Bernard catches a lot of passes in the backfield. He'll get you 4, 5, 6 passes a game, and also, he can run the ball. He's a beast. He's got a lot of weight. They use him in goal line situations, and he hardly ever fumbles the ball, unlike Jeremy Hill. So we'll see how that goes. Another running back I really like this week, and don't ask me why I don't have concrete scientific reasons, but I like Matt Jones going against Dallas. Again, we've seen a couple 30-plus point games out of Jones. I mean, most of the time, it's, under 10, recently, but it seems like a lot of games. Washington's been airing it out a lot, either because they have to or because of the matchup. But I think this matchup against Dallas is going to be good. I think you can look to Matt Jones to catch a lot of little passes in the backfield, and he matches up really well against linebackers. He can break some ankles and get loose. And, I mean, we've seen him run for an 80, 90-yard catch and run for a touchdown. I just think that this is going to be his day. And it's 0.5% owned. If he does go off and you have him in some lineups, you're going to be one of the lucky few. So keep him in mind, and in the same vein as Charles Sims. I mean, a lot of people are going to be on Doug Martin, and of course I'm going to have him in some lineups too. But if you look at Atlanta's defense, they are the league worst defense against running backs. They're 32nd in the league. They've been having some troubles lately. Devontae Freeman's been hurt. He'll be back this week, but the Bucs are pretty stout against the run. So I expect Matt Ryan to air it out to Julio Jones a lot. Jones, he's going to be in some of my lineups too. So I imagine the Bucs end up being behind it, and this is all speculation. I mean, nobody knows for sure, but that's why I play Martin and 70% of them, and Sims in the other 30. I mean, Sims makes a great value play, for a flex position at the end of your lineup making process. You're stuck. You got your flex and your defense left to pick, and you got 7,000 to do it with. Boom, Charles Sims. He's averaging 10 fantasy points a game on DraftKings. He's got 3 touchdowns. Again, he's another running back that catches a lot of passes. He gets a lot of playing time when the Bucs are behind, and Atlanta, they allow the most catches and the most PPR points to running backs, so that's right up Sims' alley. So let's move on to the wide receivers, because this, by far, to me anyway, is the most valuable position. Now, I never use anybody but a wide receiver and occasionally a running back as my flex, just simply because receivers tend to put up more points. And if you look, here are some of the wide receivers I have picked for this week that I think are going to go off. Jarvis Landry, like I said, last game, he went nuts. He, him and Tannehill hooked up for over 100 yards. I believe he caught at least a touchdown or two. Give me one sec. Let me take a look here. Sorry, my professionalism is showing, I know, but okay. Last week he caught 13 passes for 165 yards and a touchdown. Now that is the kind of game you're looking for from your wide receivers. If you do the math on that, that's a point for every 13 catches, 400. That's 38.9 DraftKings points. Now he's had several games with 20 plus. 38.9 is by far his biggest game, but I don't see that stopping. I mean, Baltimore's defense has just been horrendous, especially their pass defense. I don't know how that game flow is going to go. A lot of people like Lamar Miller, but Baltimore's not too bad up front. I mean, really, I take that back. They're not a horrible defense. It's just the morale in Baltimore is so low after losing Flacco and Smith and Forsett. That season is pretty much in the bag for them, and I think they know it. So I think they'd like to see what some of their people can do. So you might see a lot of second-string cornerbacks and stuff. I mean, I don't know for sure, to be honest. I don't get that deep into the defenses, obviously, because we're not picking defenders for DraftKings, but I just feel like Landry's going to have a big game. Okay, so on to T.Y. Hilton. He's going to be 8.2% owned, roughly. Like I said earlier, I think the Indian